Welcome everybody. It's fantastic to see so many people. For those of you who don't know, my name's Jane Wilkinson. I'm the Associate Dean Education and a long-standing colleague of Professor Polack. That's a good start, isn't it? Get your name wrong. So I'm just going to say a few words to introduce Claire. Might as well start as I mean to go on and just making it up. I'm not going to dwell too much on aspects of Claire's biography with the Medical Education Department, because I'm sure most of that will come out during her lecture. But I do just want to take a moment to reflect on what I think are the unique qualities that Claire brings to her work, and to highlight the outstanding contribution she's made both to the faculty and to medical education in particular. I first met Claire, I think, when I became Year 3 lead, and that was probably about 15 years ago. And she was already, at that point, setting up what would become the BMEU programme. And I have to confess, I did find you somewhat intimidating, if not slightly terrifying. Good. There was this experienced and confident GP who had the responsibility of negotiating with Gesundheit Nordhessen, the healthcare group running Klinikum Kassel, with a view to establishing the Kassel School of Medicine. And I can remember, I believe, the CEO of GNH at the time, a bloke, typically, and a somewhat bullish individual, and I don't want to drift into racial stereotypes, but he was exactly as you might expect such a person to be, and used to getting his own way, and totally unprepared for Claire. A woman who was more than prepared to speak her mind, not back down, and on points of principle at any rate, and always more concerned about protecting the needs of her future students than feathering her own nest. And looking back on it now, and understanding much more clearly, with the benefit of hindsight, how much of a boulder you have to push uphill to establish a new programme, let alone a new international programme, I'm staggered by the scale of the achievement of setting up the BMEU programme all those years ago. I also worked with Claire on the revalidation project from some iterations ago, which was led by one of our erstwhile colleagues, Louise Dubras. And I was really struck and in awe of her knowledge about medical education, informed by her considerable experience as a GP. It was and remains a very powerful combination. But the thing that really stands out to me, and a quality that Claire exhibits in spades, is her fearlessness in speaking truth to power, and her focus on students and colleagues, both on the academic side and in the professional services team. I've been struck so often by Claire's commitment to supporting colleagues at the start of their journey in medical education to develop and progress in their careers. And she is always prepared to bat for her colleagues in our amazing SAA team when a bit of academic heft is required. Invariably, Claire will put the interests of others ahead of her own, and I've never known her put her own interests before those of her colleagues and her students. If she feels that decisions are being made which might have a negative impact on students or colleagues, she will say so, even if it's not what people want to hear. I think Claire is widely regarded as being tough and plain-speaking, and both those things are true. But I do not think we should necessarily assume that Claire always finds it easy to fight the good fight. I suspect it is sometimes demoralising and exhausting. On occasions, it must be easier to be a people-pleaser and say what people want to hear. But we're a better and stronger department for having Claire amongst us. A really great example of a strong female leader. In the last couple of years, Claire has persuaded me to go on a walking holiday with her on the coastal parts of England. I approach this with some trepidation, as I'm fundamentally misanthropic and couldn't imagine how I could cope with being in the company of someone else 24/7, even someone I liked very much. Needless to say, I had an absolutely brilliant time in the best company. We talked and talked, we laughed a lot, we ate loads of chips and lots of ice cream, and she came equipped with the biggest bag of snacks in her rucksack, which I availed myself of on a continuous basis. And we did talk about work a fair bit. But I think that's because we both share a deep love of being a doctor and a really deep-rooted desire to ensure that we prepare the next generation of doctors to thrive in a profession which has treated us so well. We're very lucky to have such a brilliant and innovative leader in medical education. Claire encourages all of us to be the best version of ourselves, and most importantly, she leads by example. Thank you, Claire, for all the support and encouragement you offer us all. I'm sure we're all looking forward to this lecture.
Thank you, Jane. I think we're all maybe looking forward to this lecture, except me. But, there we go. So thank you, everyone, for coming, and thanks to everyone watching online. I've had this little series of texts coming in going, I can see you. So I know there's quite a lot of my friends and colleagues online. I have to say, I'm really out of my comfort zone here. Thinking about this over the last year has really given me palpitations. So why do it? Well, that's a good question. It started actually with Jane's inaugural last year, which was brilliant, obviously, and I'm not saying that just because she's my boss. I thought, I'll never follow that, so I'm just going to keep my head down. However, afterwards I was talking to Luca and Stuart, who are here somewhere, and they were going, oh, we're really looking forward to yours. You've got loads of good stories. So I thought, oh, I better do it. And then Anya has been on me all the time, and others, impressing me that it's my duty to be a visible role model for women and for education. So here I am. But a bit of a weird set of emotions, to be honest. I've been too embarrassed to advertise this talk, because it feels like boasting, really. But I've been really anxious that nobody would come. So, it's just weird talking for an hour, or about an hour, with no flexibility, with no interaction. It's just really kind of not my style. And I've also been told I'm not allowed to wander around, which is also what I usually do. Having said all that, I have enjoyed being prompted by this talk to reflect on my life. It has reinforced my appreciation of those who supported me and given me the opportunity to thank some of them. Although, of course, it's another anxiety that I miss people out and they're going to be upset. I've titled this talk about stories, because life is made up of stories. They're a crucial part of how we explain things, share things, feel things, learn things. They really filled my childhood, fueled my development, and are central to clinical practice and my approach to education and leadership. They are how I relax and connect with people. The difficult thing has been deciding which stories to tell, and even harder which ones to leave out. My friend and colleague Sandy Miles told me that autobiography and memoir are different sorts of stories, and I had to choose what I was going to do. This is probably going to be a mixture of both, but probably more memoir, picking out bits of my own story to illustrate things I think are important. My audience here and online is made up of friends, family and colleagues, and they're my overlapping worlds. It's a wide audience, so I may spend some extra time demystifying some aspects of medical education familiar to many of you, so I apologise for that. Often the meaning of experiences and stories and how they've affected you only becomes clear on reflection. So what I've learned will be presented with a degree of retrospect. By the end, I hope you will understand me better, have reflected on the importance of stories, and considered how developing medical educators can improve patient care. I'm not sure inaugural lectures are supposed to have learning outcomes, but old habits die hard. At least there's no assessment to evaluate that I've met these. So much of who I am and what I have achieved is because of the support of others. And support in my mind means listening, encouragement, practical help, but also, as Jane's alluded to, plenty of challenge, forced reflection and discussion. Sometimes this is not welcomed, but usually given in the best intentions. And this is what I grew up with. So I am sorry to those of you who find this style difficult, but at least you'll know where I get it from. So, growing up. So I grew up in Cambridge, the younger of two sisters. That's me and my sister Judy. My dad had a sabbatical in Singapore, so that was us when we were about 2 and 4, I would say. Cambridge was a weird place to grow up. We grew up in a very left-leaning household, I would say. Mum stood for Labour Council when she was pregnant with me, in fact. We went to a local comprehensive, and somehow we learned we had to hate the university. We had to hate the tourists, we had to hate the students. That was part of your persona as a kid grew up in Cambridge. It really was town v gown, even though many of us had parents working in the university. It was full of confusion. But looking back, I can see that my childhood was really special. When you're a child, differences are a real source of kind of irritation more than pride. My mum was older than other mums. She worked longer hours. She even used her maiden name. All of that was really annoying. My parents weren't interested in stuff. Like, for example, we were the last among our friends to have a colour TV. And that was really annoying as well. But there's so much that now I can appreciate. There was always talk about what was happening outside our childhood bubble. Learning about politics, foreign affairs, other people. Our home was a safe place during those years for political asylum seekers from South Africa, from Ghana, from Argentina at different times. Everyone was welcomed, fed, and listened to. So I hope now you're curious enough to indulge me a few slides about my parents. So unfortunately, both my parents are now deceased, but I've brought them with me today. I'm wearing this top, which was my mum's. I was with her when she bought it for my niece Kate's graduation. And my elephant necklace I'm wearing was given to Mum by Dad because elephants were really his thing. So my dad, Kenneth Polack, is described in his obituary as an unobtrusively outstanding public servant. I think it's a good summary. As well as being a law lecturer at King's, he was bursar, he was a magistrate, a school governor, a prison visitor, and a trustee of a number of charities. He influenced a lot of people's lives and just quietly made a difference, never in the spotlight. A story from one of his students I met one summer. They told me how disconcerting he was, of how he would ask a question but not speak immediately after they'd given an answer. The result was they kept talking, often getting into a right muddle and digging themselves a big hole. He taught them to be comfortable with silence, and they learnt to appreciate him. I like to use that trick too. My mum's obituary highlights her passion for social justice. This is also a fair summary. Although it drove her to achieve many things and help many people, she really struggled with inequalities and the guilt of being comfortably off. She role modelled that career choices for women are really complicated. She was one of the few female barristers at the bar in the early 1960s, but she gave it up to be with Dad. She moved to Cambridge, became a solicitor, and had us. She did work hard, made her name in family law, and made a difference for many women and children. Her peers, mainly men, who stayed at the bar, went on to become judges, and some got elected to the House of Lords. She acknowledged she would have enjoyed that. She wondered if she'd taken a different path, would she have achieved similar things? We'll never know. But she was happy and fulfilled, personally and professionally. So really didn't regret her choices. It was more, what if? So universities love impacts. So here are a few of theirs. I could give you great stories about all these things, but I've just chosen one. I'm very proud of their involvement with Canon John Collins and the International Defence and Aid Fund in South Africa. Dad had links to many anti-apartheid campaigners from his time in South Africa. Using Mum's firm of solicitors as cover, money was funneled from anonymous donors which included governments like Sweden to fund legal representation of anti-apartheid activists. My sister Judy and I had no idea until the story mentioning them both broke in the Sunday papers after Nelson Mandela was released. So my extraordinary parents taught me that life is not fair, a thing I still tell my children. And I inherited the guilt of being privileged. Guilt is a good motivator and does aid action and reflection, but it also can be unhelpful. It certainly weighed heavily on Mum, and now me. Talking about this inaugural with Linda just a few months ago, I was still feeling a fraud. Where is the story in middle class girl does good? However, I've managed to reframe this a bit more recently with the help of Kathy and Peter's Equality, Diversity and Inclusion teaching. I learned from the resources the term inherent advantage. It appears to remove some of the guilt, acknowledges that everyone has advantages and challenges, does not imply that someone hasn't worked hard, but accepts some people have advantage in certain areas. It is a term to encourage you to try and change things. I believe I have had challenges, I have worked hard, and I have tried to change things. So I will keep this term in mind and try and lose the guilt. It also illustrates how grateful I am to be continually stimulated to learn and reflect by my colleagues and friends. So, back to my journey. I was a ditherer, terrible ditherer. I had no idea what I wanted to do at 16 or 18 or 21, and was really jealous of people who did. I changed my A-levels from history, English and economics to biology, chemistry and maths just a week before I started term. My decision-making as a teenager was random, spontaneous and without fear. I chose my first degree in Edinburgh just because of a bus driver. I asked the way, I got off the train on a visit day, I asked the bus driver the way, and he happened to be at the end of the shift and going the way I was, so he gave me a lift. Scottish kindness just won me over straight away, that's where I wanted to go. I applied to university after A-levels, and I firmly believe that getting off the education train, gaining different experiences and growing up should be more widely encouraged and accepted as a good practice, especially for medical students. And I've talked to Shumer about this, about whether we could offer lower grades to people that have a year out. I think students need that experience of interacting with different people to help them cope with what they need to learn in medicine. So my year out involved a couple of jobs for 6 months, an Australian work permit and a round the world ticket. I learnt most from working and didn't really enjoy the traveller scene, as it were. For me, it's not the travelling that's influenced me, but the opportunity to meet different individuals from different backgrounds. Top of the influence list was a couple, my parents' sort of age, who I met at Alice Springs. Ian Dunlop was a filmmaker who had worked with Aborigine or First Nation, as we call them now, communities. They took me under their wings, introduced me to bushwhacking, which if you don't know basically means just walking. You don't need to go on a path, there's no tracks, and then you just put your sleeping bag down and just sleep under the stars. We went to see cave paintings that few people knew of, and I had the opportunity to interact with the communities which Ian worked. They instilled in me a lifelong love of nature and a curiosity about other people's lives. All this, of course, was in a different era, before email and mobile phones. My parents used to write to me at the poste restante, and actually I look back and I think, they were so brave, just letting me go. I had to rely on myself to make decisions and take responsibility for them, to decide who to trust or who not to. I learned the more you let people in, the more opportunities you get. Years later, I learned about the communities of practice, educational theory. I'd already bought into it just by my experience. During the summer of my penultimate year at Edinburgh, I went on Operation Raleigh to Guyana. I realised I knew a lot of physiology and pharmacology, but that wasn't really helping me out in the field. I decided to apply to medicine so I could work overseas and be useful wherever I went. I came back from Guyana quite ill, though. I had a tropical worm called strongyloides. Delayed diagnosis and treatment, plus the pressure of final year, gave me little time to really think, do I want to do medicine? So I just put in my UCAS form and thought, well, if I get an interview, then I'll really think about it. So Newcastle was the only place that I had an interview that I thought, oh, actually, I really do want to do medicine. It was a fabulous interview where I felt they really wanted to know about me. So just as a side, for all of those of you who do selection, please remember that the interview really matters, and there are lots of prettier places than Southampton, and we want the good people to choose us. So we want them to have an interesting interview. So I started medicine in 1989, before the age of graduate courses. Southampton was the only place which had a shortened graduate option, and it was only 4.5 years instead of 5, because you missed the research project. But I was in no hurry, and I love being up north in the hills. I'm really good at being a student, actually. I play lots of sport, and there's lots of people to play with at university. Time, as my son Scott would say, to give you a fun fact. I represented Scottish and English universities at basketball. Who would have known that? That's another mantra of mine, which is just never make assumptions. Just because I'm short doesn't mean that. Everything was easier in the 90s. Okay, I haven't quite lost the guilt, but I only had to pay for the first 2 years of medical school, and then the fees were really small. And I got a grant from Cambridge County Council to pay my fees for the last 3 years. So we did live in a different era. I graduated, worked in hospitals in the northeast, still not really knowing what I wanted to do. I knew only that I wanted to work overseas. I decided to do a year as a GP, just because I thought it might be useful in a resource-poor environment, and just to see if I liked it, really. At that point, I'd only done house jobs in medicine and surgery, 6 months in the emergency department, and 18 months of medicine and elderly care. So normally, a GP trainee would have done a bit of a mixture of jobs, including things like obstetrics and gynecology, psychiatry, child health, dermatology. I had to learn on the job. However, I loved it and managed to get through the exams and all my portfolio stuff. And I don't think anyone, except maybe me, has ever wondered if I'm a bit of a fraud having not done all those other jobs. Knowing now what I could do when I came back, I had the freedom to go back to my original aim. I took a diploma in health and hygiene in Liverpool, and learning with and from health professionals from all over the world made me even surer that was what I wanted to do. I got a job with Action Health, a small UK-based NGO working on the island of Pemba in Tanzania. Their vision was working with and offering training to local healthcare workers. This is when the light bulb really went on. I knew I wanted a career involving education. So here are some pictures from Pemba. I was very lucky to be paired with Caroline, who's come down from Scotland to be here today, which I'm very happy about. Our remit was to work with local health workers to improve things pretty much in any way we could. Pemba was a really politically neglected island with no doctors, few facilities, not much medicine. Along with Unguja, it makes up Zanzibar. It's predominantly Muslim in a mainly Christian country. And at that time, certainly, it wasn't really ready for multi-party democracy. And if you watch the news recently, you wonder whether it is now, really. Luckily for us, the volunteers before us were a couple of Indian doctors on a south-to-south initiative. They realised the best way to make progress in this environment was through public health education. So So Caroline and I threw ourselves into this. We went round the island on our little motorbikes or on local transport, and we ran workshops. So these workshops were designed to encourage and inspire health workers who were demotivated and undervalued. And they were paid the same whether they sat at home or at their healthcare facility and did nothing, as if they actually went and did something. It wasn't their fault, it was just the system. And we were trying to persuade them that there were schools nearby where they were that they could walk to, and they could go and deliver health education in schools. We were really creative and enthusiastic. Weren't we, Caroline? We did things like make models of teeth using card as props to show kids how to use the sticks to clean their teeth. We made a snakes and ladders game around HIV. This is in an environment when the kids were used to kind of teaching chalk and talk. So I wonder if it's maybe a bit overkill, but we enjoyed it. Feedback from the workshops was good, but participants were often more vocal over whether the refreshments were fizzy drinks and biscuits or chai and macati, which is like tea and bread. So we did learn refreshments matter, but also that you can't choose people. You can't please everyone all the time. We did have time to reflect a lot, and the realisation that every intervention carries risks and unexpected consequences is an uncomfortable lesson to learn, and sometimes can result in no action at all, because no action is good. Take World Immunisation Day, so that's the picture down the bottom there. UN aid agencies have made a huge difference with immunisations, but on the ground it was really uncomfortable. There was a decent per diem, which means daily wage, for all those who help, so everyone does. Whether it's the cleaner or a nurse or a porter, everyone goes out and helps. The cold chain was fairly suspect. The consent was absolutely minimal. There was no good records kept of who the children were receiving the vaccines. No discussion of side effects or waiting around to see if anyone had side effects. In fact, quite often there was no parent even present. You just grabbed a child and gave them an injection. It was absolutely horrifying. But then it has made a difference, and is there a better way of doing it? Can anyone think of one? So those were the kind of discussions we were always having. So did we make a difference? Well, probably not much at the time, but perhaps to a few individuals. Us choosing to live there, being paid a local wage, we listened, and we did really hear people, and hopefully bred in them some confidence and self-worth and motivation. I think it changed us, and that in itself might have brought benefits to others down the line. I think I became more adaptable, more appreciative of what we have here in the West. I think I'm a better informed and authentic advocate for people in Tanzania, and I think I'm a better problem solver. I'm also probably more cynical about aid, which I'm not sure is a good thing. The experiences there and my thinking and the time to think, I think, do inform a lot of what I do now. And for me, it is about those relationships and interactions and the stories you learn and then the stories you pass on so others can learn. So, back to randomness of my life. This is all about random opportunities, really. So, after nearly 2 years out of medical practice, working on Pemba, I was scared of going back to the UK. Imagine going back, having not worked for 2 years, to 7-minute appointments. It just seemed ludicrous. Through a random connection of Caroline's, I got an email offering me a job in South Island, New Zealand. So I thought, oh, why not? It was a perfect reintroduction to being a GP and another opportunity to live and learn in a different context and culture. In New Zealand, people pay a small fee to see a GP. This idea has been mooted in the UK to reduce unnecessary consultations. And the chief argument against it is the potential for those who need help not to attend and inequalities increasing. And I think it's a good argument. But I also battled with a consequence less discussed, but just as prevalent in private medicine here. If someone has paid a doctor, waited at the surgery, is reassurance really enough? Often it was, but for some the expectation was much more transactional. They expected a clear diagnosis and a prescription because that's what they've paid for. And I couldn't always do that. Didn't feel right. On the other hand, there were less consultations about minor things and very few night or weekend call-outs unless you're really needed. They really did, they worked better at self-care, I would say, than we do in this country. So, despite debate these days being very polarised, as with most things, it's complicated and nuanced, and I don't have any answers. But at least I've thought about it. By now, I knew I wanted a career with education and primary care. I saw an advert for a GP lecturer at Dunedin Medical School and thought, that's my ideal job. I was clearly not qualified for it though. But then soon after that, another bit of luck. My friend Ruth from medical school emailed me an advert for a fellowship in Scotland. I obviously couldn't let the practice down or pay to go back to the UK for an interview. So I've got really no idea how I managed to arrange this, but some kind person must have decided to help me. Because I accessed the teleconference facility in the basement of Christchurch Hospital in the middle of the night. Did an interview online. This was way before Teams, before it was easy. And I got offered the fellowship. And I think, being the woman on the TV, in that they felt really modern, that they could do it. I think that's probably what helped get me the job. So, this is a bit of a mouthful, but the fellowship was called a Higher Professional Training Fellowship in General Practice. It was an amazing opportunity started by a visionary educator and GP, Graham Buckley, who worked for NHS for Education for Scotland. It was original because it was about investing in people, not things, something the NHS doesn't do that often. It was based at Edinburgh. I was based at Edinburgh University with other fellows scattered around other Scottish universities. The focus could be on research or education or leadership. And it was really a space to personally and professionally develop. So professionally, I got back into being a UK GP. I gained teaching experience in undergraduate and postgraduate. I was stimulated by being in a research environment and enjoyed a master's with modules from different Scottish universities. We learnt leadership and organisation partly by taking turns to organise study days for all the fellows. The most memorable for me were the ones on politics. I mean, the Scottish Health Committee came to meet us. It was amazing. We did media training and we had a really good discussion about sustainability. Personally, this was also an important time for me because I met my now husband, Jim. He deserves a whole slide to himself, so I'm going to come back to him. So, obviously there are arguments for and against investing in a select few. But if you measure the success of a scheme in the long term by its outputs, the fellowship really was quite successful in terms of producing clinical academic GPs and inspiring teachers. Here's just a few of the graduates that I could find pictures for online, including Miriam, obviously. He's our own Professor of General Practice. So, I said I'd come back to Jim, and here he is. He's a true balanced academic in the School of Geography. His research for the last 20 years has mainly been in Africa, and broadly you could categorise it as public health and environment. Although I also like to think the GIS stuff is just nerdy epidemiology with maps. We make a good team. We encourage each other academically. We've written a few papers together. We share information between our faculties, share contacts, and we have lots of thought-provoking discussion. I think we complement each other as parents, and we share a love of the outdoors. Our differences and self-insight are illustrated in one of our wedding vows. He promised to tell me what's on his mind and not keep his troubles to himself, bearing in mind he hates confrontation. And I promise not to always try and get my way. Bearing in mind I am very bossy. This was tested on our honeymoon, which we spent camping and hill walking. We got to the top of Ben Alligan in Torridon in northwest Scotland. It was a beautiful day and I wanted to continue round the rocky ridge to the other top. But Jim does not like heights and exposure, and it is quite exposed. I'm stubborn and fearless, and he's usually really selfless. Still, we stopped, we discussed it, and we turned round. Those of you who know me well will realise that's true love. So post-fellowship, I stayed on in Edinburgh as a clinical lecturer, but Jim was walking what we call the postdoc plank, which is when you're trying to find grants to stop you falling off and becoming unemployed. So he obviously needed a more substantive post. He was offered a lectureship in Southampton, and given that I can work from anywhere, we moved. Despite my upbringing, we did struggle with the change in culture from north to south. I admit I am, and I was, an inverted snob. I worked in a GP practice in Romsey, having worked in a very deprived area of Edinburgh. In Muirhouse, in Edinburgh, I had a patient who realised she was pregnant at probably 20 plus weeks, having been taking drugs for months. She was worried about how she could stop the drugs and whether her baby would look like a, in her words, druggy baby. In Romsey, I had a patient who came to see me at 6 weeks, worried about the one gin she'd had at 4 weeks before she knew she was pregnant. The inequalities for those two babies are pretty stark. However, it was a wonderful practice. Dr. Peter White, who started it, had a really clear vision of what general practice looked like. And the practice supported me to become the first part-time salaried GP in Wessex to become a postgraduate trainer. And I'm really pleased to see Suma there at the back, who's one of my first registrars. And Suma's now teaching our students. In my current role as a GP, I also use those skills, and I've got Lindsay's here as well, who is a podiatrist in my current practice. And I've so enjoyed watching her blossom into this holistic first contact practitioner. So a big part of my story is being a GP. If I was a stick of rock and you cut me, I think it would say GP, not Professor of Medical Education. My experience and training as a GP informs everything I do, and I believe having two roles makes me better at both, and also makes me appreciate what I get out of the other, although it isn't great for work-life balance. There are many similarities between how I work with patients and students. Both are ultimately education roles involving listening, learning from each other, adapting to the individual who's in front of you, support and challenge, shared decision-making, problem-solving, gaining insight, sometimes acceptance. Both can be frustrating, but ultimately rewarding. The bottom line is I'm interested in and curious about people. This is fundamental, I think, to who I am, and something I tell prospective applicants to medical school at open days. If you want to do medicine, you have to be curious about people. So one recent story from general practice that illustrates how important it is for people to feel listened to and heard. So patients contact us through online forms these days, and this patient form requested some clarity over some blood results and a prescription. So I thought, I'll just phone her. I spent about 15 minutes on the phone. I answered her queries, apologised for some confusion, and just asked her how she was after a recent treatment. This made her cry. By lunchtime, she had popped into the surgery with a bunch of flowers for me. I did nothing special, but all I can assume is that she just felt heard. And actually it made me really sad that this was an unusual health experience that's worthy of reward. But that's maybe something to think about. So while I'm on this theme, I'm just going to come to a book, a quick aside. So happiness for me is being with friends and family, being active and outside, preferably away from the crowds. And I picked up this book just a couple of weeks ago on my annual Scottish hill walking weekend with 4 of my girlfriends who I've known for years, some of whom are online now, and Caroline's obviously still here. It rained a lot. Our walks were less ambitious, but our happiness wasn't dented. It was just more time for coffee and cake and mooching around charity shops. So I love this book and I recommend it. This lecture was probably on my mind as I was reading, and I realised how well it illustrated the power of a story. This book was thought-provoking in so many ways, but also relatable and really affirming. So one of the main characters is a Ghanaian psychiatrist who specialises in the effects of trauma. So I'm just going to read you a short passage about his interaction with a client. At moments like this, he did not feel he was with a patient or client. Rather, he felt as though they were someone interesting to know. They told him things not because he was a professional, full of a professional's intrigue or dispassion, but because he wanted to know. This skill may take years to develop, but the story helped my growing conviction that perhaps we need to change the emphasis and language when we're teaching and assessing consultation skills in our students, from history taking to more listening. Sorry, I'm going to have a quick drink. So back to my story. So we didn't want to move south of Newcastle, if I'm honest, but a pull factor was the New Forest and my elderly grandmother. And so this is a great excuse to tell you about my grandmothers. My grandmother's on my dad's side. So Ray, who's my genetic grandmother, is a mythical figure who died long before I was born. She studied medicine in London in the late 20s, met my grandfather and returned to South Africa. She was a bit of a maverick doctor, if I'm honest. She broke all the rules, mainly for the right reasons. For example, she understood the stigma attached to women who could not bear children, a stigma that rarely stuck on the men. Her solution was my granddad and a turkey baster. She also understood the stigma of getting pregnant out of marriage. Again, stigma didn't really stick on men. So she combined her combined solution was setting up a safe place for unmarried mothers and the option of a kind of backstreet adoption service. I would have loved to meet her. But I did have another gran, my step-gran Fran, who also has a really impressive backstory. She was brought up in Plymouth Brethren community in South Africa. Training and registering as a nurse meant being ostracised from her family and friends in that community because you weren't allowed to join another organisation. Scandalously, at that time, she was a 40-year-old spinster. She got on a boat, travelled to the UK to see if she was compatible with a man, my granddad, 15 years older than her. They went round Europe in a camper van, decided they got on well and decided to get married. Another unconventional decision was to have a do not resuscitate tattoo over her heart when she was 83. And you can see a little picture of that in the middle slide. Apparently, it cost less than a chiropodist. So she was very proud to tell me. But, you know, she did have it done in Tottenham, so maybe it's more expensive than this. My sister Judy, who's a journalist, wrote about it for the Nursing Times. It went viral in kind of old-fashioned print terms. The story reached newspapers in Australia, South Africa and parts of Europe. I was interviewed live on the Today programme when I was really hungover. It was very embarrassing. And I even published a filler in the BMJ on it. Fran's mantra was, she did not want to die twice. And I've used variations on this story many times with students to help them think about ethics, to think about autonomy, because it is a really good story. We moved in next door to Fran and had the pleasure and honour of her company, enabling her to stay in her own home until she died at 92. She was an eco-gran before it was fashionable, and we tried to live up to her standards. She is still very much in our lives, not least because we inherited her allotment-sized vegetable garden, producing more food than we can eat. And I get lots of pleasure sharing our harvests with many of you. Hopefully you've enjoyed receiving it. Frances Nyland, who was going to be here today but is unwell, but I think is watching online. We have a tradition, because Frances told me that her daughter, when she was little, really liked purple. So every year I have to give Frances a big supply of French purple beans that we grow. I think Celia, her daughter, left years ago, but I still have to give her the beans. So living in the New Forest is fantastic, and having spent most school holidays there, I knew where to build a dam, where to catch tadpoles, which are the best climbing trees, but not where to get petrol or to find a supermarket. It's given me so much joy bringing up our children to Scott and Shona in this timeless, safe environment. They've climbed the same trees, they've built dams in the same streams, and developed these intergenerational friendships in the village pub. It really does take a village to bring up two children when you're both working. Part of the fun of being a parent is embarrassing your children. But I thought I'd be kind today, Jones. I hope they know how proud we are of the well-rounded young adults they've become. And I'm also really touched that some of their friends wanted to come today. So welcome Alexander, Jess and Josh. I've really enjoyed watching you grow up as well. So, back to Southampton. Over the last 20 plus years, I've worn multiple hats and done many roles within the education faculty. I've developed some new initiatives, like the old primary care course in the old year 4, but I also feel I've been vital in just keeping the show on the road. A big part of my educational development and impact has been leading the BMEU programme, from an idea to an established programme, as Jane talked about. For those of you who don't know, the BMEU is an international initiative open to students bilingual in German and English who spend 2 years in Southampton alongside our UK students. They then go to Germany for their final 3 years. They follow the Southampton curriculum, they take Southampton assessments, they graduate with the Southampton primary medical qualification, and they gain GMC provisional registration. They undertake an FY1 in Castle under the auspices of the Wessex Deanery, and if successfully completed, can gain full GMC in German registration. Now, the remarkable thing is that despite learning clinical medicine in a German culture, context and language, and being assessed in an English culture, context and language, we have showed they do equally as well, and sometimes better, than our UK students. This is a credit to the students themselves, our teams in Southampton, and our clinical teachers in primary and secondary care in Castle, as well as our wonderful staff at Castle School of Medicine. My involvement started with Chris Stevens, my boss, who was going to be here today, but is not very well, so hopefully, Chris, you're watching online. He said, "You're bored, aren't you, Claire?" I was at the time juggling bringing up 2 small children. I had 2 jobs. Jim was frequently on research trips to Africa. So, it was okay. My 1 day a week job being not particularly challenged. I should have stayed with that. But I've never been one who knows how to turn down an interesting opportunity, so I agreed. So thanks for that, Chris. This started back in 2011 when the idea of leaving the EU was confined to a few Tory backbenchers. In the context of free movement of doctors in the EU, it seemed like a really good idea. We could learn about the way each other worked and taught. It was an opportunity to compare medical education and clinical practices, increase diversity and cultural exchange in our student body, and increase our student numbers and income outside the medical student camp. The inspiration from the programme actually came from our partner, G&H, as Jane said. The motive for them was around increasing the reputation of the hospital, recruitment and retention of good doctors, and an admiration for British medical training. It has been a tough journey, but there are so many people, and there's so many people I need to thank for their encouragement along the way that I really can't list them all, but I'm sure they know who they are. We were devastated by Brexit, but we worked through it and carried on, which in itself was a huge achievement. And in this time of worldwide political turmoil, of division and drawing up of borders, in my view, it's more important than ever to collaborate across countries. We have to learn from each other and share good practice. You see on the slide all our wonderful, some of our wonderful students and graduates, and we now have 150 fantastic graduates working all over Germany, the EU and the UK. I have no doubt that they enhance the reputation of Southampton and the UK for good medical education, and I'm really proud of them. So I'm going to talk to you briefly about two more important roles I've been part of my story. The first is Student Progress Committee, or SPC as we call it. We monitor and make decisions about students who are not progressing for health, personal, professionalism issues. We have a great team of senior tutors, programme leads and administrative colleagues, with a special mention for Lisa there at the back, who holds us all together. Many of you would be astounded by the student stories from our committee, but really they're not mine to tell. Our decisions are sometimes helped and sometimes constrained by the GMC and university guidance, but we have to make them. We discuss, we draw on all our experience and intuition, we take into account risks to the student, to their peers, to staff, to patients. Plus we have to think about the prospects of appeals and court cases and student anger. But we put our heads above the parapet. And it's often a case of just choosing the least worst option. They're not easy decisions, but I take responsibility for them and am prepared to take the flak because I know we've thought them through with the right intentions and with integrity. Having said this, it doesn't stop me having sleepless nights and sometimes not getting the outcomes we want. But I think it does link back to my experience in Pemba and realising that sometimes you just have to do something, even though there's no easy answer. It is interesting, time-consuming, emotionally exhausting, but ultimately important work. And there are some students who I never thought would make it to the end of the programme that I see at graduation, and it gives me a great feeling. There are also students who we help gain the insight which leads them to a decision to leave medicine and do something they're better suited to, and it will make them happier. And to be honest, that's equally rewarding. The last chunk of work I want to talk about is the curriculum review. And for my friends outside medicine, this is a process which happens every 5 years to ensure the curriculum is up to date and fit for purpose. I've been involved, as Jane said, with previous reviews, but this time Nicola Inglest, who's here, and Deborah Rose and I led on it. And we were brave, I think. This slide shows why we had to change. And I could go on a rant about the state of the NHS and ludicrous political decisions about workforce planning, but I won't just now. Suffice to say, we wanted a curriculum that's up to date and acknowledges that students now may learn in different ways to us. Technology is changing teaching, learning and patient care, but future doctors will still need people skills and an understanding of how to critically appraise and apply the knowledge that they just get on their phones. Our future graduates do need to be flexible, adaptable and ready to embrace ways of working that I probably can't even imagine. Time will tell how much of this grand ambition we have achieved. We have certainly put change management theory into action. Of course there are constraints, which mean that the new curriculum will not be as all singing and all dancing as we would like. Our colleagues and stakeholders have mainly brought into the vision, so I think it's time that we just let it go and let our talented team of educators, like these guys over here, implement it as best they can. So some people might flourish on their own, but I'm someone who needs mentors and supports to help me progress. And these are just some of the people I've been lucky enough to work with and learn from. I couldn't include everyone, obviously, and the people I work with now that I would put in this category as mentors and believers. And I'm not going to go through all these people because they know who they are and what they've done for me. I am just going to mention, though, Mike Porter and David Blaney, who I worked with in Edinburgh during my fellowship, and both are very sadly now deceased way too early. They were both amazing educators, but complete opposites. Mike was gentle and supportive, and David just liked to throw you in at the deep end. Both wanted to help me develop in their different ways, and both were willing to fight for education. They set me up for my education career as very different but important role models of how to be, how to facilitate learning, and how to adapt to the people you're interacting with. So my ambitions have mostly been confined to just doing the best job I can in the moment. The people here on this slide recognised in me something perhaps I don't see in myself. They challenged me to push myself, think laterally, were much more ambitious for me than I ever was for myself, and made me want to be successful in their eyes. They invested their time in me, and I didn't want to let them down, and I'm really grateful to all of them. I hope I have been, and will be to others, what these friends and mentors were to me. Some people set out to be leaders, others become leaders because people follow them. I would put myself in the latter category. I believe the legacy of a leader is what is passed on to others, the people we encourage and inspire, and for me, the stories we tell are a big part of that. As the graphic shows, that stories help lead us into the future. So now it's time to get on my, use this platform to get on my soapbox. So medical education is, like medicine, a team sport, and we need people from multiple backgrounds with different skills and knowledge to train our workforce. Today I'm going to focus on clinical educators, not because I do not think other educators are important, but just because that's my story and my experience, and so it's an area I feel qualified to speak in. It's obvious to me that the NHS needs more trained clinical educators for the reasons given here. Ultimately, better trained educators will lead to better retention and better patient care. There's an assumption doctors know how to teach. The old adage of doctors learning by see one, do one, teach one still exists in some places. Apprenticeship learning is important, but it's harder to achieve high quality education these days as hospital teams have become more and more fragmented. But things have improved in other ways. Resident doctors have to provide evidence of their training portfolios around education competencies. The Royal Colleges for many specialities have education training modules. There are also more education opportunities, the fastest growing being clinical teaching fellows as CTFs, or CTFs as we call them. They're mainly standalone posts in hospital trusts funded by tariff the Department of Health pays for hosting placements for medical students. There are other things like ITPs, and thanks to Pretty's work in our GP group in MedEd, we've been offering GPs in training education experience through this scheme. With the support of Jane and Diana, I worked with Paul Sadler at the Wessex Deanery to set up a jointly funded educational fellowship for a resident doctor. And there are other standalone education opportunities. But what there isn't is a joined-up, recognised career path in medical education. So Isabel Mitchell at CTF from a few years ago in Bournemouth worked with Judith Cave and I to do a survey of 2 years of CTFs. Results show these doctors want a medical education pathway alongside their clinical speciality training. Izzy is actually working in Australia at the moment, and maybe she wouldn't be if she'd had a career pathway. But anyway, she's written the paper and submitted it, so fingers crossed it gets published. These education posts often include learning, theoretical underpinning and pedagogical understanding of education, as well as hands-on experience. All things I think are really vital in the NHS. And it would be a real shame to lose that experience and that those individuals who have the potential to really influence the culture of the NHS going forward. And my story is built on developing self-confidence, taking opportunities, building relationships, and a whole load of luck. But not everyone has the inherent advantages I've had. I don't think developing medical educators should rely so much on luck. We can't afford to lose the enthusiasm, experience and expertise of education these young doctors have just because there's no education pathway they can follow. So this recent publication by the GMC on the future of medical education gave me some hope, so maybe this is the time to make it happen. You see the highlighted area, and of course it's a vision, so it lacks details of actually how and what resource that they can use to create and support their educators. But maybe somewhere there's a plan. I met with the GMC a while ago around our fellowship, and I'm determined to continue to agitate, as Jane says I'm quite good at, to make this vision happen and make it more tangible. So, what's a happy ending to this story? A happy ending for me is about a much wider understanding that ultimately investing in medical education and educators is better for patient care. I think medical education should be professionalised as a career pathway. And what that would look like for me would be resident doctors could apply for a training number. That would be, say, 80% clinical and 20% education. The education part would be jointly delivered between a local medical school and deanery, giving the resident wide experience and opportunity in undergraduate and postgraduate education, ideally adding in funding to complete education qualification. These people would then go on and train and support clinical supervisors on the wards, and as consultants could take on education leadership positions in trusts, deaneries and universities. I've got no doubt these pathways would be popular, improve morale and retention, as well as show the value of education. So, Peter over there refers to me sometimes as a wise old owl. And I don't think it's just because I hoot a lot, but I do quite like the metaphor. It reminds me of my favourite owl from one of the best loved and enduring stories of my lifetime, obviously Winnie the Pooh. I hope my experience has been interesting and thought-provoking, and my learning outcomes, I hope you remember them, have been met. So thank you for listening.
Well, Claire, thank you very, very much. It's always such a pleasure to wrap up these inaugural lectures, and you have done us proud, so well done you. It's very hard following Jane's act as part of a sandwich, because that was a great introduction, and I think sort of gave us an expectation of what you certainly delivered. So thank you so much. I first met Claire, well, properly to talk to. I mean, I'd met you lots of times before, but we had a trip to Castle in 2019. So we were post-Brexit and pre-pandemic, and Claire and Anya accompanied me to meet with the then new head of Gesundheit Nordhessen Holdings, and have a discussion about the sort of post-Brexit state of the programme and fees and various other interesting discussions that were quite difficult and quite scratchy. Claire was extremely calm and very well prepared and guided me through this meeting and kept things moving forward. And the most important thing that Claire did on that particular trip was she picked up my suitcase, which I'd managed to leave on the train heading to wherever it was, Berlin, and brought it back to the UK form. So thank you for that as well. Inaugurals are always a very special lecture. I have to say I'm really impressed by your bookcase earrings. I love this, and it is a very resonant of the learning and the teaching and that experience. And I actually agree with you that every student should have a year in healthcare in some respect before they come to medical school to really sort of test their dedication to the cause. I think the other thing that I've learned from you today, I always learn something from inaugural lectures, so I've learned a lot as ever. But one of the things, the points that you made, is that as we selecting our students to be doctors of the future, we're not just picking them, we're getting them to pick us, and that's something that I hadn't really appreciated. And I think all the work you've done in encouraging the students who come to us to want to come to us, rather than just put as our second choice, has been very, very clear and important. There's a game that you can play when you first meet people. What is something you could never guess about new people? Never guessed you were a basketball champion. That's pretty impressive. and I think you told us lots of times that you felt a bit of a fraud. You definitely shouldn't. That imposter syndrome hits us all at every point, and the opposite of that is hubris. So I think we should welcome that imposter syndrome, because it makes us better people as we go forward. And I think you have really demonstrated that. I think that the other thing that you have demonstrated for us is how expert in education, or expertise in education, is the clinical academics that are as important for our future as anything else that we do in this faculty. And I think it's something that triple helix is really important to recognise all of the strands that make that a strong link. So I think you've demonstrated that in spades. I am really impressed with your famous tattooed Granny Fran. and I think I'm just going to, I think that might be quite a good one to share around.
I use it with my patients.
Yeah, it's a fabulous and probably quite a good measure. That discussion with our patients about what is a good death. We all die at some point in time, and I think we are too frightened of going there sometimes, but it's part of our job. And then the final thing is just thank you a million times for the brilliant work you've done with colleagues on the curriculum review. I've got a first year, Pat. She's a first year because she should be a second year. She's retaking her first year, and she's already noticing how much better the curriculum is this year compared to last year. So all in all, well done. Thank you very much for your inaugural lecture, Professor Polack.
Right, you can talk now.